voices of youth in the region. Today, the discussion will be in English. So if those of you who need interpretation, there is a button and you can click on it. There will be live simultaneous interpretation from English to Arabic. I'll say it also in Arabic. اليوم الجلسة رح تكون باللغة الإنجليزية. يلي حابب كمان يتسمع على الترجمة الفورية فيكم تعملوا كليك على المستديرة تحت وتتسمعوا على اللغة العربية. Again, thank you for joining us. There's a big audience and a big demand today to talk about youth voices in the region. And as we are the Baku event, climate change conference of parties have just started yesterday with a lot of hopes and also a lot of ambitions on climate finance. Are these ambitions serious? What are the next days going to offer to us? This is a discussion that we will be having today. As a start, not enough climate finance is reaching fragile and conflict-affected countries. Despite heightened climate vulnerability, and there is a study that has been published by PAX, the 10 most fragile states received $269 million in climate adaptation financing in 2022, which is less than 1% of total flows. Both the quantity and quality of finance needs to be enhanced. Just over half of all climate finance to fragile countries and countries in climate comes in consociational and non-consociational loans, which further adds a burdening countries already struggling with high levels of debt. Donor risks aversion to perceived high-risk environments experiencing violent conflict or underlying instability is often cited as one of the challenges to climate finance provision, limiting communities' ability to adapt and build resilience to climate shocks and stressors. This is a problem for conflict-affected communities who often live beyond the reach of the government's control or influence, even if climate finance is available and national governments are able to receive it. It is the certainly marginalized communities that may be excluded from financial opportunities. Today, the UN FCCC discussions this year in Baku at the COP29 will focus on agreeing on a new global climate finance goal with the adoption for a new collective quantified goal on climate finance that has the ambition to replace the commitment for developed countries to a collective goal of mobilizing $100 billion per year between 2020 and 2025 for climate actions in developing countries. As the Arab Reform Initiative, and I'm sure you have seen our statement, we have 5 messages that we want to convey today at the COP29. And actually, we also have a side event happening this Friday. If you are there, please join our colleagues also on Youth Voices. One is to support youth-driven climate action through simplified funding models. We're pushing for accessible, streamlined funding models under the new collective quantified goals specifically designed to empower youth-led climate solutions. 2, we're advocating for a shift to grant-based financing. We're calling for a critical shift from loan-based to grant-based financing, particularly for adaptation efforts in our region. And 3, we promote equity and inclusion in climate finance, specifically in finance that structures and prioritizes youth, women, marginalized groups, and local communities in climate finance decisions. And 4th, we built capacity for sustainable impact in the region and to allocate resources dedicated to capacity building and partnerships, which is critical for supporting long-term climate resilience. And 5, we ensure transparency and accessibility in climate finance. And transparency, as we see in transparent funding and allocation, is vital for building trust and expanding access. So today's webinar, we are joined with 4 wonderful youth advocates from different countries of the region. And we will be focusing on what are the role of youth in confronting climate change in the region. And again, as we have partnered with our colleagues from the Middle East Council on Global Affairs and invited these 4 wonderful youth from the region, we will look at highlight the unique youth perspectives on climate crisis, how regional leaders can do more to involve young stakeholders and more effectively when confronting environmental challenges, as we are seeing now in our region. So I'll introduce quickly the 4 speakers in order. And of course, we will have 2 rounds of where each speaker will speak for 5 minutes, and then we can open up for questions and answers from the audience. We're joined today with Hessa El-Noaimi. She's the Director of Development at Arab Youth Climate Movement in Qatar. She also leads the development initiatives and strategies. Our second speaker is Lilian Haddad. Lilian is the co-founder of Eco Youth in Jordan, where she is dedicated to promoting gender and climate justice in alignment with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Our third speaker is Omar Cissé. He's a COP28 youth delegate, co-founder of Seed Balls in Mauritania, and he is a conservationist and passionate about environment and management. Aren't we all passionate about environment? I think everyone in this group is. And our last speaker is Umayma Al-Khalil Al-Fan. She's an environmental engineer and a researcher on sustainable development and leader of the Youth for Climate in Morocco. Thank you for being with us, the 4 of you. So we'll start with our first round, and here with Hessa. Can you tell us more? What are the climate finance mechanisms and what are the promises of this COP in Baku on climate finance compared to the COP28, and also delve more on Qatar's position in this? تفضلي Hessa. Thank you.
Thank you, Sareen. Thank you, Shukran. Thank you to the Middle East Council and Arab Reform Initiative for hosting us youth from the MENA region to share our insights on climate action. COP29 is going to be a very important COP for the story of global mobilization for climate action. It feels like we say this about every single COP, but this one is primarily important because this is when we're starting to move from setting targets and agreeing on what our common goals are to a realistic action plan and implementation. So the focus for this year is going to be on finance, climate finance, to give a bit of perspective to our audience that may not be, very well versed in the climate field. What the new collective quantified goal is, what Sareen has kindly introduced, is an action plan or a framework that the UNFCCC has decided will support developing nations, particularly in getting the necessary funds in order to be able to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. Now, this is extremely important when we think about it in the from a historical perspective. The biggest emitters of carbon emissions historically are the global north. So mostly leading the United States. This is important when you think about Trump being recently elected and threatening to pull out of the Paris peace agreement, as well as thinking about the United States also being a large producer of fossil fuels. The global north has historically been the largest contributor to carbon emissions, and yet they are also the countries that are pledging the most in this climate fund. Yet in reality, moving from 2022, when this pledge has been made, what has actually materialized, what actual money has gone to these developing nations? Not much of it. Now, rather than getting into the detail of this, I would like to put into perspective what is important to consider in climate finance. And this is what my colleague Neshad, my other co-founder of AYCM in Baku today, is discussing. It's important to consider climate finance as an instrument to support progress and not as another limiting tool, especially when we're talking about the Middle East and North Africa. I mean this in the sense that it cannot be in the form of debts only. We have to ensure that there is grants and there is a flow of money, whether from the public sector or the private sector, that can support real sustainable progress in different industries and sectors. We are talking, when we're discussing the MENA region, we are talking about countries like Lebanon, like Tunisia, like Yemen, where more than 50% of their public funds are going to debt service, more than education, more than health. If you can imagine that, we're talking about fragile states that are spending more on on paying back debt rather than on their actual public service funds. This is important to consider. So when we're talking about climate finance, we can't say that this is going to be in the form of debt that will create more distress for countries in the MENA region, but rather in the way of grants and supporting the public and private sector in investing in more climate responsible and climate agile projects. The other thing to consider is that with what is happening in the MENA region, with the ongoing genocide in Palestine, with the ongoing conflicts in Yemen and in Sudan, we cannot think about climate change and climate financing without thinking about accountability and with the role of conflict when it comes to the climate. If conflict was to be considered a country in and of itself, the conflict would be the fifth largest contributor to carbon emissions. So if conflict was a country, it would be the fifth leading country in carbon emissions. In Gaza alone, in January 2024, the UN reported, so January 2024, if we consider that's 10 months ago, of course, this number has increased. The UN has reported that the damage that was done to Gaza's infrastructure is equivalent to $8.9 billion. That is almost 10 times more than the funding that the MENA region as a whole received as climate finance. Thinking about these numbers in perspective, we can't talk about giving support and financial instruments to developing nations to fight climate change when at the same time these nations are getting bombed and infrastructure is getting broken down and these political, social, and economical structures are becoming more fragile. So another big point for us as AYCM and COP this year is discussing the role of conflict with climate, the role of security and peace with climate. The MENA region is a region that suffers from water stress. In the next 5 years, we will lose almost 45 to 50% of our freshwater sources. We as a youth, believe that it's important for not only our people to be aware of the impact of climate change and what that can do to our businesses and our livelihoods, but as well as our governments understanding the real threat it will have on our economies and our societies. For that to take place, we want to play a bigger role in climate finance discussions. We believe that, as I said, we should be moving, and as Sareen also said, Arab Reform Initiative's goal is to move away from grants, from debt to more grant-based finance support. We want more dialogue to take place across different sectors. We believe that the youth, who represent 65% of the MENA population, have a big role to play in terms of what policies can be sustainable in targeting climate change. And at the same time, we believe that despite how dystopic and maybe negative everything seems right now, we must maintain hope and we must believe that as a youth, as organizations, as a network working and living in the MENA region, we have to take care of ourselves, our mental states, and ensure that our hope continues so that we are able to attend these conferences, run our own forums, create our own networks in order to make sure that our voice continues on, that our policy recommendations are taken on board, and that our governments can have an opportunity to also listen to us and learn from our insights. In terms of Qatar's position in COP, Qatar, of course, maintains the Paris Agreement. We are a signatory of it. Qatar has pledged millions and millions of dollars in terms of climate finance. This makes us very proud, and we feel as AYCM that this is a positive, we live in a positive environment when it comes to climate change acknowledgement and the feeling of that it is an actual threat that we need to address. However, as with all other countries, the role of implementation, we need to look at what are actual goals. So Qatar's National Development Climate Change Plan, for example, is a great first step in terms of setting targets for what different industries need to do in order to target climate change. But we believe that more needs to be done. We need to, I think, work with more companies and more governmental entities to get more yearly data. There needs to be more transparency on what the progress has been thus far. But I think that is the case in all countries. And this is one of the other topics that will be discussed in the UN, the transparency report and how our countries reporting on progress. In terms of the fossil fuel phase out, of course, we are a country that depends on oil and gas. We believe that as an NGO, we have a responsibility, a duty to partake in research, to publish independent research in the field of carbon emissions and what is our country investing in terms of innovation when it comes to LNG production. What Qatar Energy has been very vocal recently, actually, about what are the innovative ways that Qatar is producing LNG in sustainable ways. Rather than pushing the oil and gas industry out of the conversation, we believe that we need to engage in more multi-sector conversations in order to come up with more realistic targets and be able to also learn from that industry and get that know-how in order to, I believe, work efficiently towards our common goal. Just to close off my segment of this panel, I think it's important to maintain our positivity, understand that we are now in a place where we are getting more realistic. There are less world leaders attending the COP than ever before. It's disheartening, but I think as organizations and youth, we shouldn't let that hold us back. We should, in fact, feel that maybe the baton is moving on to us, and we should invest more in research, getting more data, accurate, transparent data, and use that to create evidence-based policy recommendations that we can give away to either the United Nations, to other organizations, to governments, or to the private sector.
Thank you so much, Hessa. This was an excellent intervention, and you've captured a lot. I think we will definitely go back to some of these the points that you have raised. And in the second round, we can also talk more about the youth demands and the youth's role that now is being shifted towards more youth involvement in these big fora. I'll give the floor to Lillian to talk more and to continue where Hessa has started and to delve a bit more on the climate finance for adaptation and mitigation projects that you are leading, and you can delve more onto what are the examples and projects that are happening. Lillian, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sareen. Continuously with what Hess said, mostly in the MENA region and with our situation in the climate change risks and issues, the MENA region is the most affected with all of the risks happening on it regarding the water scarcity, everything regarding the adaptation methodology that we can do regarding mitigation. And mostly when we are talking about adaptation, we neglect it in most of the conversation, and we shed light on mitigation more. So this is also combined when we are talking about the climate risk that is made by human-made risks, and at the same time with the country's responsibilities on being accountable for most of the emotion. We are talking about a common responsibility that the countries need to do, and for this we need to address the climate finance for the adaptation specifically for all of the countries, specifically in the MENA region. For the MENA region, if I am going to address the climate finance, it's directly connected with the climate adaptation and mitigation goals and the strategies and frameworks that the countries are working on with the NDCs and with the NAPs. Mostly the national plans that the countries are working on need more development, need to be more worked on, but they are doing their best with the funding they're most accessible to. So doing the framework and the plans, working in the ground up with the initiatives, the private sector, the governments, and all collaborative together is not enough while we have funding limitations. We have technical capacities gaps when implementation of such frameworks on the ground, basically on the needs of the locals or on the city's needs. At the same time, we are facing also the political insecurities, like Hessa just covered most of the conflicts that we have, and this is a pressing issue that need to be accounted and to be putting in the agenda when we are talking about having funding when أصلا we have under pressure work, under funding and under capabilities together, so it can be happening in the best. One of the goals you just mentioned, one of in the COP 29, like to have the $100 like billion funding, and till now the cash flow and the official it didn't exceed the 1% of what the countries really have. And this is need to be addressed more to have more ability to attract much funders to the region, to take chance to have more like working a necessity of the financial resources that can make a major change and major like contributor to the work of the adaptation specifically. Also, we can see also only the challenges or the threats and some of incapabilities of the region, because also we have another countries that they have own reliable initiatives and like voluntary initiatives that play a huge role in the adaptation work specifically. In Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, a lot of countries that have a lot of work on the agriculture, water sector, and working also on the mitigation part with the energy sector. So this is also can be shed light also as an opportunity to work more on it. If we also gonna shed on the MENA region specifically with the adaptation and mitigation, the last two COPs were in MENA, so this has made somehow an urgency and more understanding for the region how it's necessary to have action towards working into the adaptation and mitigation work across the region. So this is something we need to know, and knowing that the highest population of the MENA is youth, so this is also a good sign to have more youth initiatives, more youth work in progress within the climate work specifically. And if we are going to talk more on the conflicts and how the least developed countries, like they have political instability, it's actually they continue to struggle. And not with just immediate and like the direct now impact that we have from the climate threats, also how we can tackle this in the future interventions, and how to meet the global climate funds criteria that can't be all the time like strictly limits the ability to access to such funds, and to underwork under these kind of criteria. So having the recipient of these funds and how to manage it across the country is something also need to be addressed. Actually, most of the countries, like as example, Jordan, we are in winter now and we are facing a very dry winter. This is like part of the adaptation method that we need to have. We have the NBAs and we have the NDCs, but in the same time, we have the opportunity to do more frameworks of the current situation and the current data that we have, and how to work together with collaborative ministries and collaborative like approaches to collect all these to have a proper like and more accurate like work within the climate adaptation and mitigation funds. So mostly all of these impacts of the climate change can be like a collective work by having also the common sense from the other working like parties alongside. Hopefully in this COP it's a COP of peace, so I don't know if it will be peace washing more, or it will be having more best result than the other COPs. So hopefully it can be also directed to the climate finance for the most conflict countries in the region, because most of the MENA region countries, it's underfunding with the financial index, and this is need to be addressed. It's one of the priorities. Even the countries are under conflict, it need to be addressed, and to see how it can be done in direct and indirect way within collaborative like measures, kind of. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Also, very interesting intervention. I think you've talked about different topics, and we will come back also to these. And now we'll jump to Omar. Here, Omar, you can delve more in terms of reparation. We're talking a lot about loss and damage, reparation within the frameworks of the COP. Perhaps you can give us a bit of perspectives on Mauritania, which is a fragile country, and also Mauritania's position vis-à-vis the Africa bloc. Omar, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity actually to speak on this crucial topic. Actually, we know like the issue of climate reparation actually has gained significant momentum for this year conference, because we know also this conference name is actually, the name of this conference is actually Finance the COP. Yeah, that's actually the agenda of this COP. So from a Mauritanian perspective, like an African standpoint perspective, like reparation are not like namely like about financial compensation. So they're actually about climate justice. So many African countries, like despite like contributing like a minimal of global emission, are actually affected by climate change, but like especially in Mauritania experience, we are actually facing like desertification, which is threatening our agricultural land, and also especially coastal erosion, which is actually affecting our coastal fishing communities and coastal communities. And there's actually a frequent and intense drought, which is currently rising in especially in the northern Mauritania. So this kind of challenges we are facing actually are really limiting our resources and also hindering our also development effort. So, however, like the reparation debate actually face a lot of obstacle, because there is actually a bit of resistance from developed nation, many of which actually are reluctant like to accept the liability of the historical emission they've been actually having, which is actually affecting most of actually low income countries. And we also face actually the right now, the only challenge we are facing is actually how we can quantify our damages, because and how actually we can kind of create that kind of mechanism to quantify that damage and also get that climate reparation. So to move actually this reparation forward, I think we need actually really to propose like something like kind of a fund and loss and damage, which is actually separate from adaptation and also mitigation finance, because we also actually need to kind of create a clear framework where we will be assessing and quantifying like the related damages we really get, because from the developing countries, and also kind of create a legal mechanism that will ensure like that accountability, and they will be also there. And what is happening for this COP29, especially COP29 negotiator must also actually like there is a clear time frame for the provision of fund to lower income countries. Money should not be given actually as a form of money should be given as a form of grant, not like a loan, because right now most of actually, especially in Mauritania, we have like existing debt, so we cannot actually get those type of as a loan. We have to get it as a grant, because it will worsen our economy. And there is a lot of we also need to really understand how this money have to be used, because there is actually some sub goals. We really need to know how the money actually where should go, like from the affected communities, especially vulnerable communities. And right now, I think most of movement, they are really calling for 1 trillion annual like USD to be funded for those communities who are affected, like countries. And I think also it's very important to really understand the recovering process of those countries. And also one of the, if I remember, from the last week, I was attending a meeting. One of actually the Azerbaijan presidency, they have been really wanted to make this COP to be adaptation COP, where actually many it will be a priority talk from this negotiations. And in conclusion, for the reparation debate actually is very crucial, especially in Mauritania, because Mauritania right now we're actually facing a lot of debt from especially European Union and all those things. So we really need to get those type of grant, not as a grant, but not as a loan. And there is a reparation right now, especially most of northern Mauritania. Affected community are really facing big issues in terms of like climate recovery, because their land are degraded. And that's why especially I'm working on that seed ball Mauritania, where we are actually restoring land and working with vulnerable communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. This was also very good. And you've touched what are the different demands. I think this is interesting also to see, the difference between grants versus loans, and countries that are constantly, covering and paying back debts from years and years, such as the case of Mauritania in your case. We'll go to Umayma. And here we'll delve more on the loss and damage debate, and perhaps you can give us also examples around Morocco's perspective and positions around the issue of loss and damage, and also within the bigger bloc, African bloc. Umayma, go ahead.
Thanks, thank you, Tayin. Thanks for having me today, and I'm very glad to be part of this discussion. To follow up on what has already been said, I will raise the concept of loss and damage. It has become a key element of climate justice today, addressing to the irreversible impacts of climate change that adaptation alone cannot resolve and elevate this problem. Since its introduction in COP90 with the Warsaw Mechanism, and more recently with the establishment of the loss and damage fund at COP27, there is some progress has been made, but it's still not enough of the urgency we face today. There is some recent data shows that Africa is responsible than less than 4% of global emissions, but is bearing massive economic losses, estimate approximately around $17 billion annually due to the more intense droughts, floods, and heat waves driven by impacts of climate change. For this reason, without a robust measure, the cause of loss and damage, it will be could reach to 100 billion per year by 2030. There is like many development countries like Morocco is particularly vulnerable with record droughts, have reduced the agricultural production by 32% in 2022, and the water resources have declined by approximately 70% over the past 3 decades. The climate shock directly impacts the millions of lives, of livelihoods, food security, water access. There, however, significant challenges remain in implementing the principle of loss and damage. This fund, despite its establishment last year, but it's still underfunded, sadly. Moreover, the accessing this fund is blocked by complex bureaucratic process and the lack of transparency. That's why this establishment of this fund it's still blocked just now. And for the Moroccan perspective today, Morocco therefore advocates for equitable distribution and simplified procedure to ensure that funds reach the most affected and the most affected communities directly, the fund must be conceived for quick, clear, transparent, and direct access, recognizing that every month of delay costs lives and livelihoods. And the national and African levels, Morocco is making several initiative plans, strategy, like a national strategy for sustainable development, national plan for water, and etc. And by fostering African regional cooperation, that today, as we gather at COP 29, I think that Morocco and Africa's position it's more clear. They demand immediate and tangible actions to what the vulnerable countries can not only adapt but also be compensated for the irreversible loss they are already enduring. Sadly, today, the climate emergency will not wait, and it's imperative to act now to secure a sustainable future, a viable future for Africa, for Morocco, and the most exposed communities across our continent. And as Hessa says, today we need to move from debt tools to financial aid to help these countries to adapt and to elevate this climate change impact.
Thank you, Umayma. I think we will definitely talk about, how do we shift from loans to grants. Omar also suggested a couple of ideas, a separate fund. Again, who's going to monitor this fund and the transparency associated with it? Hessa also and Lian both talked heavily around conflict and also the different inequalities and the political also instability that we have in our respective countries. We'll move to the second round, and here I'd like to encourage our audience. Don't be shy. There's a lot of you here with us, so please ask your questions in English or in Arabic. You can type it down at the Q&A button. So we'll move to the second round again here with the same order, 5 minutes by each for each speaker, and we'll go back to you, Hessa, around how can youth in the region act more effectively when advocating for action on climate issues, and who are in this region also the main allies of the youth climate movements. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I think for youth to act more effectively in our region, we need to focus our efforts a lot on research. Being in the field now for the past 7 to 8 years, we've connected with several networks and alliances across the MENA region, and I see that there's a lot of civic action that takes place, especially when we talk about academic institutions, in schools, across, ministries are very happy to hold climate awareness weeks, but then do we get relevant and pertinent research coming out on a yearly basis from our countries talking about what action has been taken? Rarely that's the case. This is not to point fingers, but rather to say that we are at a point now where I think we need to focus our efforts more. We are young people that are growing. Eventually, inshallah, we'll be holding positions in our countries where we can affect even more influence and change. Speaking about AYCM's experience more specifically, we are a nonprofit organization in Qatar made up of a collection of young people from Qatar and other parts of the MENA region that advocate for climate awareness and education through a multi-sector approach. We like to work with the public and private sector, as well as publishing independent research on the ecological degradation and climate change. And then it's about creating workshops and capacity building opportunities so that companies, ministries, even young people like students are able to learn tools on how to affect change. One of the ways we did this was through our carbon footprint tracking app. If you go on AYCM's website, you will see that this is an app that we developed from scratch that helps anyone be able to track how much waste they create, how much water and energy consumption they consume, their transportation consumption, and other factors that lead to their carbon footprint. Now, a skeptic can come and say, will this really affect the necessary change that we need? I mean, at the end of the day, you're the highest producer of LNG as Qatar. Of course, this can be taken, we're not saying that this will equal that, but what this creates is a series of other effects. What that carbon footprint app development resulted in is, for the first time, ministries started working with an NGO like us in Qatar. For the first time, we had ads in the newspaper saying, we ask for the community in Qatar to sign up to this and find out what your carbon footprint is. We had schools from all over the country reach out to us to say, come talk to our students, see what awareness we can raise. And then eventually we had companies asking us if we provide consultancy on ESG strategies, how to decrease their carbon emissions, how to decrease their waste production, and all of that. All this to say that our work is crucial. It's not small. Although it can start off as a passion and as a project, it can develop with focused efforts in evidence-based policy recommendations, which I believe and AYCM believe is a big area for us to create effective change when it comes to climate change mitigation. We have a lack of data, lack of local data that is relevant to us. For example, I know, based off of my conversations with my family and my older people in my family, that the weather patterns are not the same as they used to be. I know that it used to rain sooner. I know that it used to rain more. Do I have data to prove this? Do I have data over the past decades to prove this? No. Can I create a policy around this that is extremely accurate and that can be tracked, and so on and so forth? Now, our friends in the Ministry of Environment are doing a lot in this regard. They are also, it's almost like the wave has passed and they're trying to catch up. So I really acknowledge their efforts and can see why it will take a lot more time for us to get to a place where we can confidently implement change and track it. But this is our role as the youth and as independent organizations in our region, because we have the energy, we have the knowledge. This field is not easy to go into. As someone who did not study this and I went into it as a passion, my background is in politics, and my full-time work is in education. But going into it, I realized there's a lot to learn, but there's so much that can be done. And so it's about focusing those efforts into capacity building, gathering data that is relevant to our context, whether it is our country or it is our region, sharing that information to our local communities and to our region, and then get something out of it. What is the outcome? Either policy recommendations, initiatives, reports. I invite you to look at some of the reports that we published as AYCM. We looked at the carbon emissions in Qatar over the past 50 years. This was an independent research that we took upon ourselves. These are the things that can support more localized action, more effective action. And I think when it comes to the matter of specifically climate financing and climate justice at large, I hope I'm not speaking out of passion now and I'm really forgetting my notes, but I'm going to say this from my heart. We fought for a place at the table for so long and we rarely get it. We fought for a bigger piece of the cake. I'm talking about the global context in the international forums like the COP or the Security Council or the General Assembly of the United Nations. We fought so much, and we always find ourselves not getting half as enough. We've all discussed today how the MENA region contributes to less than 5% of the historical carbon emissions. And yet we are some of the most vulnerable communities and some of the most vulnerable states. On top of that, we have fragile states. And on top of that, we are occupied and there are wars going on in our region. And yet we still don't have the support that we have. So here I would advocate that as a young people, as these independent organizations that are so powerful, we should get in touch. We should set up networks together. We should push for funds to be created on the regional level, perhaps not on the international level. On the regional level, gather funds. The MENA region is diverse. You have Qatar, which has one of the highest GDPs in the world, that is committed to climate change, committed to support, that can do more. We can create a hub where there is more support coming out of for our region, rather maybe than depending on these platforms. That's not to say that the COP is not important. At the end of the day, the entire civilization, the human civilization, is at threat, and we all need to work together to find a way. And my action affects my neighbors' reality, and so on and so forth. But in terms of quick and effective support, I do think we need to think more about localization and regionalization. Last year, AYCM hosted the local conference of youth under the UNFCCC in Qatar. In Jordan, you have just hosted the regional conference of youth this September. These, I think, platforms provide an opportunity for researchers, for professors, for CEOs, so on and so forth, to come and share knowledge and come out with good action. And I think more of this will affect change. And in terms of who are our allies, I think we have allies in. Everyone should be our ally, but I believe we have allies in the most obscure of places. Like I've mentioned in some of the anecdotes I just shared, we didn't expect that creating the carbon footprint app was going to garner support on different levels within the country. But just going ahead and doing that has proven to us that there are mutual gains. It's not just about supporting the cause, but it's about finding what incentivizes, for example, McKinsey to invite us to a workshop that looks at capacity building in the private sector, or what incentivizes the Ministry of Awqaf, which is our religious ministry, to ask us to train the imams on sustainability within Islam. There are many allies. We shouldn't close our doors to anyone, and we should rather find mutual gains amongst everyone. Different stakeholders and different entities.
Thank you. Thank you. No, thank you, Hessa. This is also very good. I think there's a lot of action points that you've mentioned here about localized knowledge and research, also about local solutions, and more specifically creating regional, from national to regional networks that do exist. Maybe, put them more forward and create these kinds of collaborations and frameworks to work together at the regional level. I'll go back to Lillian here, and perhaps Lillian, you can delve more about the youth activists. How can youth activists better integrate social justice issues that you've mentioned before, such as gender and economic inequality, into their own climate advocacy? And if you can give us certain examples and action points as well. Go ahead, Lillian, 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Sareen. When we are talking about more social justice advocating, actually, it's kind of, in this kind of conflicts, heartbreaking, and it's needed at the same time. So having advocates for verbally and doing actions about all the things that we are facing in the MENA and globally is something important. For me, I see that social justice can be gathering the gender, economic, all of the aspects that is needed and that is not seen in the specific regions. When we're talking about social justice specifically, the only thinking that I have in mind now, what's happening in Gaza, Lebanon, and Yemen, what happened in Syria and other countries that faced a lot of social injustice and a lot of they faced a lot of conflicts and beside. So like in Gaza, you can't, within having a genocide, to say we are going to protect the land, we are going to do adaptation for the olive oil, and the olive oil and olive trees in the region. At the same time, people are doesn't have water accessibility, doesn't have the basic hygiene necessity that they need. Also, the basic needs that as a human rights considered issues are not met and not considered. So this is part of the main things that need to be seen and putting into consideration in all of the discussions, and taking accountability from all the countries about what's happening, and take the consideration also of the international law, how to consider these all of the conflicts that are happening. It's affecting all of the global emissions that is relying on the COP concept and what else that we are doing as an advocate. If I'm gonna delve more into our role as advocates in the climate justice and how we can delve more into our work, being at the table and having our voices here is something important to encourage more youth policy related with an overview of the new generations and and taking into consideration also the past generation overview and have a collective opinion on all of these kind of situation. The other thing, it's more involving of the woman. Mostly we see women as victims and most people who are affected from climate impacts. But for me, we need to see women as leaders more, playing leadership roles in the climate conferences, in the assemblies, also in the leading private sector governments and all of other parties. At the same time, women can be more productive and contributing more to the work of the climate justice, especially covering or maybe seeing a better perspective of the social and economic also gathered with the environmental, like also maybe the governance also in some parts. So this is maybe can be taken into consideration. A lot of youth movements and a lot of also initiatives that are taking place right now in COP29 and also in other countries in the MENA or globally. All of what's happening, the movements, the climate interventions of the youth is important to be shed light on and to be more advocated. Maybe the part of the social media that we all now recognized within all of the recent points that happening, that we also may advocate more how to have the proper use of social media to advocate more for the climate justice issues and how to promote more solution and more actions in the fields in the region and to work locally from bottom-up approaches, which is important to gather all of this data and to give it with the policies along line so we can have a full more informational and transparent vision from both and to put it together. At the same time, I'm looking into how to listen to the people who are fighting right now and to have more stories heard from their side. We are hearing a lot of stories from the genocide or from conflict areas, from indigenous people, from vulnerable communities that they are facing a lot, but we are not capable to know and to hear their own stories. So I think we need to advocate more of the people's stories alongside with all of the efforts we have. So it's more a collective work that we can do. Advocating is more to work with the people for me. Part of our work with the eco youth, we all the time to go to talk with the people and to have their perspective and how we can work together into delve into more projects, initiatives that can support in these kind of issues and how to raise awareness about it and educate about it. Mostly, if I'm gonna talk about more of there's a lot of actually of success stories that we can see in MENA. Like Hessa just said about their work on the coalition, and I know there is a lot of coalitions, networks, a lot of initiatives, projects that are working into these kind of projects. What I think is like accessibility more because مثلا as example in Jordan we work as mostly in agriculture sector. There is a lot of women leaders of farmers for a lot of coalitions that can produce more mechanism and work into the climate. It's not only يعني taking chance to only do a climate work, also it's delve into creating more jobs opportunities and have more align with all of the collaborative work. Also, I visited Morocco in the last year and I saw one of like this is for Umayma, one of the beautiful examples there for the argan oil. I thought that is one of the wonderful biodiversity usage for the forest and the argan oil there, and how it's all woman-led and woman-forced. Yani it's all by women, and the products owned also by women, and a very good product. So this is also another example of the women work on it. And for this, I think that being an advocate or to talk about at least to set a table and to be engaged with what you are facing now and how to work with it with the other parties, it's important. So I hope يعني somehow reach the full climate justice and to carry on all the injustice in the world and having the peace we need to, we want to. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. I mean, talking about stories is very important and reflecting stories of across the region, also in countries in conflicts like Lebanon, Palestine, and you've mentioned the example of Morocco. We'll go to Omar, and also there is a question in the Q&A chat, and I'll jump onto that as well. And here, based on your experience, and since you were at the COP last year, how have Arab governments responded to different youth actions on climate change, specifically in the recent years? And how can they improve their engagements with the different youth voices? Omar, please go ahead.
Okay. So actually, from my experience, actually, I've seen a gradual shift in the way of our like how our government are actually approaching, the youth. I know it's not actually perfect, but like there is actually definitely progress around it, because I remember like not like long ago where actually youth voices on climate change were actually barely acknowledged. But right now, like we see some real change. So for instance, like I was really encouraged when actually I visited last year UAE, where actually I saw the UAE government with the COP28 presidency. They funded like 100 youth delegate, which actually I was part of it. And they also funded like 10 youth from UAE, especially also in the MENA region. They funded them for the first time, some of them first time coming to the COP, some of them maybe they have experience to come actually to experience. And where actually also they really feature those climate activists in UAE. And it's not actually only about like recognition. It's also about like some concrete collaboration we've been seeing, because also as you can see, Hessa, she has actually with the Minister of Environment, they are working with them as a youth-led organization. It's actually a huge winning, because most of young people right now, they are getting seat. It's not it can be just an edge of a seat, but like it's a seat. So yeah, but here is the things like we need to know actually there has been some positive step, but we need to be honest also about like where we actually as a youth, where we still fall short, because many of our government are still kind of hesitant to actually fully embrace like youth voices. But in actually climate policy, especially when you can see some countries, people want to come and be a part of the negotiation, as they maybe went for some training about capacity building, climate negotiation skill and everything, but like they went to be part of the negotiator from the country, but they still kind of have that kind of, the government is difficult to embrace them, because how they can improve it. But I believe something. It has to start from things from fundamental shift, like into perspective, where actually our government, they need to see our young people not just as a future, but just as like kind of a partner, like as a partner. and they just need to have it as a token presentation, but like representation, but just they have to involve them into decision-making process where they can be part of it and also share their knowledge. So it's also very, very important. I would love to see something which is actually very crucial. I would love to see more channel about like where youth, they can, as Hessa said, like where youth input, where they can create that type of channel. They can share, as she said, researchers, but also they can kind of create those kind of policy discussions where every country, they will be dedicated to have some youth advisory like input, where they can have some kind of workshop with the government and also share them with, just like what is happening right now with ELCOI. At the end of the ELCOI, everyone gathering, and after that they can have a meeting with the government and have those type of decision making, talking and everything. But also there is something very important. Education can be another key also. We need also our government to invest more about like in environmental in education. And we saw also, as right now I've been working on a project in MENA region with as a climate advisory board with some COP28 delegate selected. So we are working to actually gather some data for those MENA regions, and which also where it will be very meaningful. We will try to gather those data to understand how education, like especially in the youth space, how actually in the school, how they're actually perceiving like climate change. And we need also to talk about resources. Like many youth-led climate initiative actually are really doing like incredible work, many of them, but just they are short of budget. So if our government like can kind of like maybe provide like this kind of funding, just not can be like outside of funding, there can be like a government funding, and it's actually happening right now, but there is still lack of that. There is still some good project happening and also need to be really seen and also to be funded. And I think it's very important to have that kind of regional collaboration, which I'm seeing, but need to be enhanced, like those kind of MENA climate network, where actually you can see many young people can actually gather there and have those type of thing, just like what is happening in MENA region. We can bring more youth from especially vulnerable communities, not just key vulnerable community can come and talk with policymakers and those youth researchers, because they also need to see what actually is on the ground and like those grassroots people. And I think climate change, we just need to understand like climate change also doesn't also respect borders, because it's everyone face the climate change. So just creating those type of platform, as I can see those kind of, it can be climate region or anything. It will be really like it will be very way like to work together, because I think like the first thing is to work together, so we can actually kind of create those type of change and also attract our government so they can be here for us as a partner. So I feel like it's very important, as like especially as me, the organization I'm working on. So we are trying to approach like the government so they can work with us, and as UN, not only international organization, but like as a government, because our first ally is actually our government, and after that we can try to ally with our international organization, because we need the government as like a standing point. And also we see like something very important, like especially in Mauritania, we have like green Mauritania network, which actually funded funded by the government, to bring like 4 of them to come for the negotiation, and also to attend their first COP, so they can actually see how COP is actually coming, and also put them in the negotiation process, so they can try to learn and also be in the future those type of leaders, where they can negotiate for us, and also which is very important. Yeah.
Thank you, Omar. We'll jump to Umayma. I think this is the question of who are our allies, and what are the local experiences that we are also witnessing, and how can we create regional networks. I think this has been discussed several by everyone in this group. So maybe here, Umayma, we can go back to the climate action and expectations of this COP29. And what are the young leaders realistically asking at the COP29, specifically now that we know that our region is going several crises, wars, occupation, instability, fragile economies, and especially with regards to climate finance and loss and damage. And what are the limitations that we're also facing vis-a-vis events like the COP? We'll give you 5 minutes very quick, and then we have to also take some of the questions that are coming online. تفضلي أميمة.
Thank you, Sarine. As young leaders committed to the fight against climate change, we have a crucial role to play in building true climate justice. We are not only the first generation to be directly affected by climate impacts, but also those who will bear the heavy responsibility of crafting sustainable solution and sustainable future. Therefore, it's essential that we are integrated in an honest and meaningful way into the decision-making process, both at a national and international level. That's according to United Nations, we are 16% of population in the developing countries yet, but they are often marginalized in the critical climate discussion. That's why we should not be seen as the mere spectators or peripheral participants, but as integral actors in the decision-making process that's really shape our future, of course. We have our own perspective, innovative ideas, and creative solution can transform the economic and social system that contribute to resolve the climate crisis. However, for our role to be truly effective, it's really necessary that we are integrated into all the process of decision making. It's in a real way and in manifold way. There is a lot of previous COPs have shown progress that, but also shortcomings. Therefore, we call for transparency and accessible financial mechanisms that allow young people to actively participate in the management and the implementation of the climate solution. We have the IPCC report that according to this report, there is 70% of young people worldwide say that they want to be more involved in the climate action, in the climate decision-making process. But for example, at COP26, there is only 3% of them were included in the official state delegation. As we can see, this gap between our aspiration, our perspective, our ambition, and the reality of inclusion, they highlight the extent of the effort needed to ensure a real youth participation, because we have a really huge capacities to mobilize the local communities, to lead the collective actions and advocate for political changes. It's so important to integrate youth into the whole process of decision making. It should not be limited to mere consultation or symbolic representation, but it must involve active participation with a central role in negotiation, direct access to information. It's so important to access to information and have the real influence on the decision made. Today, I think at COP29, we should be it should be a turning point where young people from all regions, especially the most vulnerable, can not only be present but also have a real influence on global climate commitments. And our experience in Youth for Climate Morocco, we believe that preparing youth representatives for effective engagement, the COP should formalize capacity building program that train young delegates in negotiation policy analysis, and climate finance. This program could be organized, of course, in partnership with the educational institutes and the NGOs in the run-up of the climate of the COP. First of all, to ensure that young people or young representatives arrive with the skills. They need to conduct complex negotiations successfully. This approach will enable youth to acquire the knowledge they need to participate effectively and development term advocacy skills. And last but not least, without sensitive and effective inclusion and participation of youth, true climate justice can never be fully achieved and can never be fully elevated.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Umayma, and thank you for our 4 speakers. We still have like 5 minutes for this webinar, so I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience. I think you've answered most of it, but let's go towards a couple of ones. Sarah Muhammad here. How can we bridge the gap between youth climate activists and decision makers? What are the success stories of youth-led climate initiatives in the MENA region? Another question by Debbie. Several of you have mentioned applying for grants to fund your essential work with all the donor fatigue and so many climate NGOs. Have you also been considering investment strategies, perhaps among those in the Arab diaspora? So this is two questions, maybe also another one that we can take, and here each one can respond for 1 minute. With everything that we have going on politically in the Middle East, I think many people struggle to prioritize the environment when there's so many lives or life or death problems unfolding all the time. For decades, it's been difficult to think about moving forward or forward planning in the future when so many of our people and countries have been struggling. So how do we get people to see the environment as important in this kind of world? These are the 3 to 4 questions that I'm taking, and maybe here each one with the same order, 1 minute, and then we can see if we can take other questions. Hessa, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, Serene, but I made the mistake of trying to read the question while you're going through it, and I ended up not listening to it that well. So if someone would like to answer so that I can catch up on what the question is, it would be good.
Maybe we go Lillian, and then Omar, and then Umayma, and then we finish with you. Lillian.
The question is more about more successful initiatives in the region and how we can work more in the same like climate action work. This is exactly, Sarine, just to make sure. Okay.
Yes.
Actually, there is a lot of examples of like in the region, especially in the MENA, of working networks, movements, coalitions that are working on the climate. Yani I can share some of the names, but I don't want to forget others. So, yani I can, Sarine, if you can share the name of the participant, I can share a lot of examples like along. But for sure, there's a lot of new what I have seen if in the past, from the past COP that happened 27 in Egypt till now, a lot of new initiatives and projects from youth-led initiatives and projects has been born and start working on the climate issues, environmental issues, and other related issues to the climate, environment, and agriculture, which is impressive, and we need to shed a light on it because if this is speaking up, it's about how people are more aware of the problems now and they are keen to take an action to solve it. So this is an important part that we need to cover. And the other part I may talk about is how like the youth, they are trying to having with the alcoys and the arcoys, like this arcoy was about more like youth voices on within the conflict areas now we have in the region. And most of the policies that came was solutions of what we can do as youth in these kind of stances. So this is important also to have in each country all the time the alcoys and participate of a new actually interested youth that are not directly linked to the climate work, but they are at least having different backgrounds, but they are keening also to learn and know more. And this is also can be taking into consideration that in this way we will have more people integrated in the work of the climate. And maybe I can mention that the Ministry of Environment here in Jordan before the COPs all the time make like pre-meetings that is more capacity building and talking about the negotiations, talking about what will happen in the big conferences such as COP and other conferences. And this also play a role like to have more capacities to know about the more policy making procedures and how to be included in such policies and decision making, which is I agree with Omar with it that we need all the time to have youth taking decisions within the group. I have 1 minute, so I think I exceeded, right? Okay, thank you.
Great. No, thank you, Lillian. I think we'll jump to Omar, so we can also see and here there's several questions, you know, that were addressed, you know, about youth alliances that can be created that include different interested groups. There's also another question by Nora: how do we see the impact of civil society in bringing youth to take part in the political sphere, as it is in critical in progressing climate actions?
All right. I think I just saw like how can a youth alliance be created that include those interested in climate aspect. I feel like also people they have like they kind of have a misunderstanding of maybe can we say like when we say climate is just not about environment, but it can be about health, it can be about anything. So it can be about all those things because affecting us human health and our environment, right? So this type of thing can happen because as right now, if I remember, there has been a Yungo, something named Yungo, I remember. They have been creating this type of different groups and anyone can just join. Yeah, and like, but in a local aspect, every like country or maybe can be regional, they can type of create that type of alliance where actually they can create, you know, those type of sharing topic, brainstorming group where actually they can share knowledge and also at the end try to see if they can collaborate with the government and also collaborate with one local NGOs and they can bring that specific idea or specific topic to the government. I think it's very important just to try to approach to that on that way because creating that local knowledge, working with this local organization, and from there you can connect with the government, and after that try to see how you can get involved into any decision making or anything. It can be very important. Yeah. So I don't know if I responded to your question, but like I just give you an idea. Yeah.
No, you've done. Thank you, Omar. And I think we'll be in touch with a lot of people who are online following us here, and we'll reach out to them, whether bilaterally or collectively as a group. Obaima, and then we'll go to you, Hessa, to end the panel. 1 minute. تفضلي.
Okay. I want to highlight several successful environmental initiatives in the MENA region, such as the UA green building efforts, the Jordan solar energy project, Tunisia waste reduction companies, and Morocco to focus on clean energy and sustainable agriculture. That show that engaging local communities is the key to fostering environmental activity. The experience of Morocco has become a leader in solar energy with projects like the Noor Solar Complex, while also promoting sustainable farming practice to combat desertification, also by leveraging cultural values, collaborating with the religious leaders, and using the digital platform to reach the tech-savvy youth. This initiative effectively raise awareness and inspire action. The empowerment women also and young people to providing and integrating sustainable solutions and practice into daily lives can help us and can to participation and create lasting change in the region. And just to add, today there's really no way to back our space or for negligence in the face of this emergency climate crisis. And the international community must assume that it's a historical responsibility to work for the countries, the vulnerable countries affected, and activate the financing mechanism to attain the climate justice, the equitable terms for the future.
Thank you, Mayma. Hassa will end the panel with you.
My colleagues,
1 minute.
My colleagues have summarized it perfectly. The only thing I may add is that just like Umayma just said, the climate change issue and the degradation of our soil and our environmental ecosystems is something that will affect every sector and industry in our countries. So we are past the point where, and it is already doing that, whether with food insecurity or the way that all companies now are responsible for certain ESG strategies, how green taxes are going to be introduced or have been already introduced in other parts of the world. It has become financially more lucrative and responsible for you to invest in climate change awareness and strategies. The issue that we still have is how are we doing that and how are we doing it effectively enough? And I think this is where the role of youth is very important, because we are the, not only are we the largest segment of the population in the MENA region, but we are also the most tech savvy. We are the largest population in universities that are entering new programs in innovative technologies, in new ways of architecture and building, and all the different ways that we can address climate resilience from a technical perspective and from a practical perspective. These capabilities are being learned, and the knowledge is being acquired. But I think it's the role of the youth can play a part in how do we collect that information and make it accessible, and then how do we bring different people to the table? Because everyone loves going to a youth conference because we don't have an agenda technically. It's neutral almost for ministries and for companies and for entities to come, and that power needs to be used. We should offer those spaces more so that more conversation can take place and less high stakes conversation. When these people in big positions in our countries go to the economic forum or go to big platforms, they're more likely to be strategic, more likely to be diplomatic in the way that they think and talk and what information is shared. But when it's happening on a smaller level and when we're hosting it, people let loose and they start talking and thinking together, and that's where the magic happens. And so this is where there's different capabilities and information being shared, where best practice is shared. And in the future, also youth, not in the future, I mean, even now we can use this information to create also income generating opportunities for ourselves as organizations to be able to invest in more climate resilience, in better strategies, better policies, maybe even funding certain researchers in the field, supporting universities in holding conferences in our name. We have the most guidance on this topic. Like I've said in the beginning, we are well versed in it. It's not an easy topic to come into. A lot of the older generation have a lot of catching up to do in terms of learning what it takes to create effective change and adaptation when it comes to climate change. We should use the information that we have to share that, to transfer that knowledge and affect positive change. So, and just to quickly answer the question about, someone asked, I think it was Noura, about in a region where there's so much conflict and how can we care about a topic like this? I agree with you. It's been actually difficult even on a personal level for me to maintain my work with AYCM, seeing everything that's happening in the world. And I'm sure my colleagues might share my sentiment here that it can be very disheartening when you feel like the global system is working against you, and you might put so much effort and investment in whatever. You know what I mean. To that, I would say we need to acknowledge that climate change is another threat. It's something that will hurt us even more. It will affect our structures even more. And so we should be doing what we can to alleviate that pressure, to alleviate that stress on our communities that are already under stress for several other reasons. Climate change will be another one. It will just be about how we mitigate that and how we can adapt in time for us to be able to avoid catastrophes.
Thank you so much, Hassa. Again, I'd like to thank our four panelists, Hassa, Lilian, Omar, and Umayma, for the wonderful interventions. I think this has been, and everyone, and all the audience also, that has been very active. We even have an investor online, so please feel free to reach out to her, Debbie. She is willing to offer her services. So this is the type of platform and fora that we at the Arab Reform Initiative and with partners at the Middle East Council, that we would like to sustain and continue to put together young voices and to talk about climate activism, solutions, policy solutions, but also what are the different policy spheres in a region that is continuously going through injustices, political turmoil, occupation, and wars. Again, thank you so much on behalf of the two institutions. I'd like also to thank our colleagues at the Middle East Council. Please tune in on Friday, 9:30 Baku time at the UFM pavilion. We have also a discussion with young activists and advocates who are in Baku at the moment and to talk about climate finance and possible ways forward. Thank you so much. يعطيكم العافية والصحة and hope to see you all very soon in person. Thank you. Goodbye.